Throughout the Trump years, MSNBC anchor Rachel Maddow, she filled the role as America's chief Russia accuser, and Matt Taibbi has dubbed her the new Bill O'Reilly. In his new post for Maddow's often colorful monologues, journalist and author Matt Taibbi joins us now to explain. Matt, I really enjoyed this post, and I think for maybe our younger viewers, they weren't really around for Bill O'Reilly, and they may not remember his legacy. What was the point that you were trying to make here?
Well, O'Reilly during the Bush years was the #1 ranked cable personality, TV news personality, and he got there in a very specific way. He played the role of this kind of jingoistic frontman who was constantly accusing people of being insufficiently patriotic, insufficiently pro-war, and he would have a parade of guests on and question them about how devoted they were to the cause or whether they were too affiliated or too supportive of terrorism or Islam or whatever it was. And that catapulted him to the top of the ratings. And he significantly relied upon a story that turned out to be false, the WMD story, to kind of launch him into the stratosphere. So the point I was trying to make is I think, MSNBC has kind of stepped into that role as the network that is hyper-patriotic, that is constantly talking about a foreign dictator, and has been elevated by a story that, that has turned out to have lots and lots of holes in it, and they haven't acknowledged that.
And this is the thing I'm fascinated by, which is that I guess with O'Reilly, he kind of apologized, I guess, for his role with Iraq. Is that ever going to come from Maddow? I think there's more of a shamelessness that comes from it, from her coverage, despite the fact that, at least in this case, it's not like O'Reilly where his ratings went up. Her ratings went down significantly as a result of Russiagate. Do you think that there's any sort of reckoning that will ever come there?
Well, yeah. First of all, I knew and liked Rachel once upon a time, and she's had a kind of a dazzling career, I think, by any measure. I think just this turn has been really strange. It represents, I think, a strategic move by the networks. I think they thought they were going to ride this forever. But the problem is that what's actually happened is that the ratings have kind of seesawed as the story has gone up and down. And so they were doing great in 2017 and 2018. Then they lost a significant amount of market share again. And I think what's going on now is that rather than have a reckoning, they're still hoping that the story will bounce back and they'll be able to throw all their weight behind it, through developments like this Kalimnik thing. Whereas the reality is they ought to be going back and saying, yeah, we screwed up on things like the Steele dossier.
Yeah, and it's not even just that. It stems all the way down the line. We just were talking about the collapse of that Russian bounty story. That was the lead of her program, like night after night after night. And this is something where I think that, people are always like, why are you guys so obsessed with Russiagate? I don't think people seem to understand how much it impacted American foreign policy and the minds of a lot of people who are elite. An entire range of options were removed from American politics because of this story, right?
Sure. Yeah. Also, we renewed the AOMF shortly after that story broke, which I think was probably part of the calculation of the people who leaked it. One of the things about the bounty story that's amazing is that it just shows how incredibly easy it is for a handful of people in the intelligence agencies to significantly affect domestic American politics and foreign policy, right? So you leak this story to a couple of reporters, and next thing you know, it's a major factor in a presidential election, and you're getting funding to stay in Afghanistan and all kinds of other things. And the reason you can do that is because the kind of fact-checking apparatus within the traditional media just isn't what it used to be. Yes, the WMD story happened, but these things happen regularly now, which is kind of the problem.
Yeah, and that's part of where I don't know if there is such a thing as going back. So now, as we move forward, is there another Russiagate? What does the media landscape look like? Obviously, they are suffering. They're going to try and latch on to something. They tried Marjorie Taylor Greene. That didn't work out. So now what? What are they going to do next?
Well, I talked about this for my book Hate Inc. for the new edition. There's kind of this technique I like to talk about called bomb holing, which is you cover up the old bombshell era with a new bombshell. And this is what I think a lot of the networks have figured out, which is that, yeah, if you have a news cycle dominating story like the Afghan bounty thing, and you run night after night after night with that story, and it blows up later, all you have to do to make your audiences forget about it is give them a new bombshell to worry about, like in this case, the Kalimnik thing. And the reason for that is that media audiences are now segmented, and they forgive you. They expect you to make mistakes. They don't really care as long as they're directed in the right direction. And that was not the case before, right? So previously, when news organizations made bad mistakes, like the WMD thing, they were expected to have some kind of accounting, and they don't anymore because the audiences don't mind.
Yeah, really well said, man. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
All right, thanks, Tiger.
Good to see you. One more Rising for you right after this.